Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the third in our series of BNMS webinars on different aspects of research. And yes, this time I'm actually live from my house, not off Swan. Yeah, right. But hopefully this evening's webinar will take your mind off the chill outside for an hour. If you've joined us for the early webinars, I hope you enjoyed the first two by Gary Cook and Maggie Cooper. The webinars are all being recorded for future reference, and access to the recordings are a benefit for BNMS members through our members page. So if you're a member, you still have the opportunity to watch them now. Tonight's webinar, like the rest of the series, is open access, so you can watch it for free now. But if you do find it useful, please have a think about joining our society if you're not already a member. And if you know of anyone who would benefit from accessing these live webinars, please do pass the relevant information on to them. Anyway, on to this evening's webinar. Today's main presentation is entitled Implementation of New Radionuclides for Clinical Trials in the UK, and will be presented to you by the wonderful Jane Sosabowski. I first met Jane when I was working at the Royal Free in London. Part of that role involved working with Cancer Research UK, and so I was very lucky to be able to spend some of my time at the Barts Cancer Institute. This gave me my first taste of research, and I must admit, I felt a bit lost. Then I met Jane, and she was just so helpful. She's so kind and encouraging to me, and I'm always going to be very grateful to her for that. Jane's work is primarily in the preclinical arena. She's specialised in radiolabeled peptides, antibodies, and other carriers for imaging. And she's particularly interested in bringing novel therapy radionuclides into clinical use. Jane now leads a team of researchers there, as well as taking forward the Radionuclides for Health UK initiative, which you'll hopefully have heard of. This is an important piece of work which aims to highlight the need for a robust and sustainable domestic supply of radionuclides for future delivery of novel cancer radiopharmaceutical therapies. And there are many more of these than you would expect. Although I didn't go on to do a more formal research role myself, I remember that time working with her and the team very fondly. And knowing that I have someone like Jane to ask the difficult questions of over the years has been great. She is another research superhero in my eyes. So Jane's presentation will last roughly 30 to 40 minutes. And for those of you who are able to join us live, there will be the opportunity for you to ask questions at the end in our Q&A session, where she'll be joined by our panel of experts. The panel members joining Jane this evening will be John Wadsley, Ian Murray, and Juliana Maynard. And this evening, I'll be chairing the Q&A session. So a little bit about our panel. John Wadsley is based at Weston Park in Sheffield, where he is a consultant clinical oncologist. His interests are in thyroid cancer, endocrine malignancies, and he has a particular interest in MRT and targeted therapy for advanced thyroid cancer. I got to know John Wadsley relatively recently when he became initially the MRT lead on the BNMS Council, and since the UK MRT Consortium and the BNMS MRT group merged, I've had the pleasure to work more closely with him. He's well informed about research in general and on theranostics and therapy in particular. John is the NIHR lead for cancer radiotherapy and imaging research, and so makes a significant contribution to research in the UK, as well as providing an important link between the NIHR and the BNMS. More than that, what I love about John are his measured and insightful responses to things, and as chair of the BNMS MRT Consortium, I have found him extremely helpful and supportive of what we're trying to achieve. Sheffield, where he is based, is not too far from where I am from in God's own county, Yorkshire, so he has that going for him as well. Ian Murray is Deputy Head of Radioisotope Physics at the Royal Marsden. As a senior clinical scientist, Ian specialises in molecular imaging and molecular radiotherapy using unsealed radioactive sources. Prior to this, he worked at Barts and successfully gained his PhD in radiobiology. He is very knowledgeable about all aspects of new radionuclide research and has co-authored many publications on diagnostic and theranostic imaging, as well as in radiation safety and nuclear medicine. And last but no means least, we have Juliana Maynard. So Juliana is much more than a simply lovely person, and she certainly is this. She is an industrial research scientist, and let me get my teeth in, she is Head of Translational Imaging and Director of Operations and Engagement for the National Total Body PET platform. Nearly did it. She specialises in imaging technologies and leads a multi-skilled team which aims to bring innovative medicines to patients faster. Juliana has a solid track record of research across a wide range of disease and therapy areas. And more recently, she's been working hard behind the scenes to advance the agenda of molecular radiotherapy in the UK, as well as helping to facilitate better working relationships with one of our regulators. So, I would like to thank Jane and all our panel members for giving up their valuable time this evening to share their expertise with us all. As with last time, to keep things simple, we are using a Q&As tab. So if you wish to ask a question, please use this tab to enter it. Please don't use the chat function for questions as they may get missed. You can actually, however, use the chat function for general comments, information or feedback. At the end of the presentation, I'll read out the questions logged in the Q&A section to the panel on your behalf for discussion. I'd like to thank this opportunity before we start to thank our sponsors, SciTech, Curium and Siemens, who have helped make this evening possible. And finally, I hope you find this webinar both interesting and useful, and I look forward to hearing your feedback. So there we have it. Without further ado, I'll pass you on to the capable hands of Professor Jane Sosabowski. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Julie. I have warned my fellow panelists that my internet connection is a bit flaky this evening, so I hope to get through this presentation without any problems. Okay, so I wonder if you can see that. I can't see you anymore, so does that look okay? Somebody will have to tell me audibly.
I don't know if you can hear me, but
yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, we can just see you. I don't know if you're sharing something, but we can't see any presentation yet.
I'm sorry not to be very competent about this. About that.
Oh yes, it's looking. It's you probably want to just do slideshow. We can see your notes on there. I don't know if you can make the actual presentation larger.
I have to. No, it's okay. I can change it to the. Is that okay?
We can still. Yeah, that's perfect. Yes, great. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, so thank you very much for inviting me to give this seminar about a topic I'm very interested and excited about, the implementation of new radionuclides into clinical trials in the UK. I would like to, this is an overview of the aim of the talk. And I really want to just give a kind of some background and also provide an overview of the steps we need to take to move new targeted alpha therapies into the clinic in the UK. This is not a hugely practical presentation, it's more like a call to arms. So because my focus is going to be on therapy radionuclides that will require UK-based manufacturing. So this is not, for the faint-hearted. Okay, so as Julie mentioned, we have had two previous presentations in this series, and these are them, and you can go and have a look at them. And they are really interesting. They talked mainly about manufacturing of PET radiopharmaceuticals and clinical trials in PET, but also in SPECT. And what I'm really going to talk about today is therapy. So for that, the clinical trials that are needed are obviously clinical trials, investigational medicinal products with, all the full regulations. So as I said, not really for the faint-hearted. However, it's an area where there's huge interest at the moment, and I'm sure you're all aware about the huge global interest and commercial investment that has been going on in the area, with many companies buying into radiopharmaceutical therapies, also known, we call it in the UK, molecular radiotherapy, also known as targeted radionuclide therapy, radioligand therapy, if it's a ligand. And this really started with the approval of two very well-known products, the lutetium-177 beta therapies, Lutathera against neuroendocrine tumors, and Pluvicto against the anti-PSMA lutetium therapy. And these are both AAA Novartis products that are approved back in 2018, 2020, around there. And the sort of kind of sister to these targeted beta therapies is the targeted alpha therapies, and these are hugely exciting. Alpha therapies look really promising, maybe proved to be more efficacious than the beta therapies, but they're currently being held back by a lack of supply of radionuclides. There's one approved product so far that is a radionuclide, really, Xofigo. It's an important alpha therapy because it was the front runner for alpha therapies in the clinic, and but clinical trials of other agents are underway in multiple locations around the world, and including the alpha therapies, which is a really exciting development. Let's remove that. So if we have a look at the number of clinical trials, so every now and again I go and have a look at on clinicaltrials.gov, and I count up all the number of clinical trials by radionuclide, because I'm interested in radionuclide supply and how this affects what we do. So we can only work with what we've got. So if we haven't got the radionuclide supply, which is our basic raw material for all radiopharmaceuticals, then we can't do the trials that we need or develop the products that we want to. And so this is not, you know, it's not a time scale that's got any type of regular intervals, but between the first time I looked as June 21 up to November 24, there's about 3.5 years. So you can see that over that time, there's been a steady growth in the number of trials that are at that time, a snapshot in time, you know, either in June 21, October 22, June 23, or November 24, at that snapshot time, how many trials were recruiting or not yet recruiting. So these are not trials that are finished, or you know, they're trials that are ongoing, or are future trials that are going to be ongoing. And you can see that lutetium has been growing, and this is really a reflection of the fact that there is really good radionuclide supply for lutetium-177 at the moment. Okay, it's not unrestricted, but it's pretty robust. There's a pretty robust supply. Radium-223 has been going down. I would say this is really a reflection of the fact that it's very difficult to do chemistry on radium-223. It's difficult to incorporate into lots of other products because there's no stable chelators for radium-223. So this is kind of a work in progress. You know, although Xofigo has been trialed in different settings for bone mets and different indications, and in combination therapies, I'd say that this, until we have really good chelators for radium-223, we're not going to see growth really there in clinical trials anyway. But if we have a look at this radionuclide, actinium-225, it's hugely interesting. There have been lots of studies around the world, mainly in Germany, in South Africa, showing the real potential of this radionuclide when attached to a PSMA ligand against prostate cancer, and showing some really nice effects. And kind of long effects as well. And it seems that indications are that they might be more effective than the corresponding lutetium therapies. And these are the trials that we're starting to see come, you know, that are on our doorstep at the moment, with, you know, various companies coming to hospitals and saying, would you be able to trial this agent in your patients, and can you do feasibility studies and things like that? So we've seen quite a lot of that. There are no current trials ongoing in the UK, but there is huge potential for starting those trials. And then I want to talk to you about two other radionuclides, both alpha emitters as well. So there's astatine-211 and lead-212. Now, you may have heard less about these, and that's also to do with radionuclide supply, because there isn't much of it. So I can't seem to advance now. Advancing. Okay, so the point I want to make here, that it's not possible to expand clinical trials of novel radiopharmaceuticals without a robust supply of radionuclides. If we had an unlimited supply of alpha particle emitting radionuclides, I have no doubt that this graph would be completely different, and we'd be seeing any number of trials in these different novel radionuclides. So let's just have a look at these radionuclides for targeted alpha therapy. So we've got actinium-225. The half-life is 9.9 days. It has the therapeutic emissions of 4 alphas, so it's very cytotoxic. And there are some challenges around these 4 alphas emissions to do with whether the chelator basically, once there's an alpha emission, the radionuclide comes out of the chelator. So we have to be sure, that most of the radiopharmaceutical is actually in the tumor when it decays. The global supply, there is a limited amounts from thorium-229. So this is where the production has come from to do all the kind of compassionate use trials that we've seen. These are kind of not clinical trials, but they are studies in patients that, so they're not controlled clinical trials. They're just studies in patients that have been done under compassionate use. And that's where we've seen most of that supply come from. There are also accelerated routes under development, which are challenging as well due to some other radionuclides such as actinium-227 that might end up in the preparation. But these are also the supply is not yet there. So there is still a challenge of running clinical trials with actinium-225, and we saw this really with Razy Bio's phase 3 trial. So they were running an actinium-225 trial. They were bought up by Bristol Myers Squibb for about 4.1 billion, so enormous amount of money. And we find that, that amount of money still can't buy you access to actinium-225 because they had to halt their trial to new recruits simply because they don't have the supply of the radionuclide. So, it really is a very challenging area to run, especially phase 3 trials where you would want to put quite a few patients into the trials. In the UK, I'm always interested in UK supply, and so should you all be, because this is where we want to, obviously we want to affect our patients. We have some possible target material in the country, but no current route under development. And actinium is metal, so it's metal chemistry, chelators, DOTA, those type of very well-known chemistry that we kind of understand. Then we have a look at lead-212. Now, this is a very interesting radionuclide. It's got a half-life of 10.64 hours. So it's already a half-life that looks very much more suitable for marrying with a peptide than this actinium-225, which is much, much longer half-life. It's got the therapeutic emissions from whichever branch you look at are 2 betas and 1 alpha. So it's less potential for toxicity because of it kind of retains most of the activity in the chelator when it decays with the beta. There's most of the compound will still be intact. And when we look at global supply, the parent is available, thorium-228. Reactor routes, there are also reactor routes from radium-226. And for instance, this is how NRG in the Netherlands is going to produce lead-212. And the most interesting thing to us is the UK supply. So we have a really good supply from reprocessed uranium through the UK National Nuclear Laboratory from nuclear legacy material. So this is something that UK NNL has been looking at and working on liberating for use as a medical radionuclide, which is really exciting, and why we have started working on it preclinically and trying to sort out the route to the clinic for lead-212 in the UK. Again, metal radiochemistry, very amenable to chelation, etc. And then the third radionuclide, astatine-211, is interesting. It's a halogen, okay? It's halogen chemistry, so something that might be used in compounds where you might have seen iodine-131 before. You could swap this out with astatine-211. The half-life 7.2 hours, also very nice short half-life, 1 alpha, so very uncomplicated decay scheme as opposed to something like actinium and lead-212, which have more complicated decay schemes with radioactive daughters. Astatine doesn't. The global supply is restricted because it's from high energy cyclotrons. So there's only about 5 to 6 currently producing in the States and Europe. There are more in Japan. The UK supply is possible through the MC40 cyclotron at the University of Birmingham, which is our only high energy cyclotron in the UK. Now, what are we interested in when we're thinking about what are we going to do in the UK? So I would argue that for future patient access, if we're thinking about what we need to do as next steps for to get things into the clinic in the UK, that half-life is the most important factor when we are planning UK infrastructure and manufacturing capability. Now, why do I say that? I know there are a lot of proponents of actinium-225, but I would say that you know, it's got a 10-day half-life. This can be manufactured almost anywhere in the world, and we could still use it in the UK, whereas these two have got much shorter half-lives. So if we want our patients to be able to benefit from lead-212, from this UK supply, then we need infrastructure in this country to be able to manufacture these radiopharmaceuticals. So let's look towards what we're going to need. Similarly, for astatine-211, astatine is produced, you know, only a few places in the world, but the only hospitals that can use it are ones that are close to a high energy cyclotron. So we need to think about what we need to do in the UK to make this possible. So the UK National Nuclear Laboratory, back in 2021, they had a strategic plan where they introduced health and nuclear medicine as a focused area and started reprocessing uranium. Their reprocessed uranium program to make lead-212 from thorium-228 through there I'll show you the decay chain now. So if we have a look at the decay chain here, we looking at this uranium-232, and from which they are getting the thorium-228. And you can see thorium-228 has a nice half-life of 1.91 years, which is very suitable for a nice long-lived generator that would produce lead-212 here. Alternatively, you could have a generator, radium-224, which is much more akin to a technetium generator of 6.6 days. So you would need several generators a week or a generator a week in order to be able to produce doses from a radium-224 generator. So there's these two options here. It doesn't decay to a chain of alpha emitters. If you have a look at lead-212, it basically decays with the beta, 2 betas, 1 alpha, or beta, alpha, beta. So 2 betas, 1 alpha. So there's less potential for there being a kind of off-target alpha emission in areas of the body where perhaps you wouldn't want it to happen. As I said, both these generators have been developed. None of them are available, so none of them are commercially available. And we hope that will change in the future. But at the moment, I don't see a company that is developing, is planning on doing this. But there have been really promising phase 1 clinical results, and we'll just have a look at this one. It's a compound that you would be very familiar with because it's a metastatin receptor express ligand. So it's dotamtate, a different chelator with essentially the same molecule that we use in octreotate. This clinical trial was done that was just a first in human and dose escalation trial. And you can see really nice, these are kind of akin to the images that you've seen with the actinium-225, where you just see the reduction in the tumors, you know, both small and also large tumors as well. And if we have a look, these are all the patients that were in the trial. And if we have a look at all the patients that were in the trial, so this was just a dose finding trial, so it was really great to see some efficacy as well. And look at these, you know, most had a partial response, stable disease, some complete response, and some complete response with really quite long duration. So this is a very small trial, but the promise is there from these agents. So Of course, there are lots of people in the community that are very excited about this, and the SNM did this podcast where we basically, people with interest in lead-212 talked about the potential for lead-212 from different countries, so from Australia, the US, from Europe, and from the UK. You can have a listen to that as well if you're interested. So lead-212, what about the current supply and clinical activity? So if we have a look, you can get it from the NIDC, which is the National Isotope Development Center in the US, which is essentially the US Department of Energy, or Oak Ridge National Laboratory is where this material comes from. And so if you are from the US, then you can procure radium-224 lead-212 generators, and also buy thorium-228 if you want to make your own thorium generator, which there are a few companies that are doing this. And then very exciting, Thor Medical is a kind of new player who in the field who's come forward and has just shipped their first batches of thorium-228 to companies. So they've shipped their first batches to Advanced Cell in Australia. Advanced Cell have a thorium-228 lead-212 generator that they've developed themselves, as do Art Bio. They have a thorium-228 lead-212 generator. So although these generators aren't available, they're not producing them commercially, they're producing them so that they can run clinical trials of their agents. There is this potential to use the thorium-228 in generators. And in the future, we also hope that the UK NNL will become a supplier in some way, that we will be getting supply of lead-212 from reprocessed uranium in the future. If we look at who's doing the clinical activity so far, Orano-Med, they have their own supply this is from thorium, natural thorium, and they are not interested in supplying lead-212 or thorium-228 to anybody else. They just have it's a kind of integrated chain, as you say, where they produce radiopharmaceuticals. Art Bio and Advanced Cell are very interested in doing clinical trials in the UK, if we can make this work with their generators. And Perspective have their model is a radium-224 lead-212 generator, and they are also doing clinical trials. So there's a few companies who are interested and have started doing clinical trials in the area. In the UK, we had some money from the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero, DESNZ, in the Medical Radionuclides Innovation Programme, because there is this huge interest in lead-212 generators, lead-212, because we have the supply from the UK NNL. Then this project is designing and just looking at how we can incorporate lead-212 generators into the radiopharmacy environment, whether that would be the best place for them, whether it would be too difficult. So this project is reading out in March this year, and it's ending then. So we'll have some recommendations once we get there. So let's have a look at astatine-211. This is also a hugely interesting radionuclide, and it's, as I said, 7.2 hours, and it has all these iodine. You can do imaging with I-124, I-123 analogs, therapy with I-131, and then alpha therapy with astatine-211, and these are close analogs of each other. It's cyclotron produced, as I said, with an alpha beam, and as I said, it's got an uncomplicated decay with an alpha decay with no other daughters. So each provides one alpha emission, but the half-life limits the distribution distance. So as we said, astatine can be accelerated, produced in almost infinite amounts because it's naturally occurring bismuth that's the target, and you need an alpha beam. And so if we have a look at where these alpha beams are available, we can see that these are the 5 that we're producing in North America. There's some producing in Asia, some cyclotrons producing in Asia. And then if we have a look in Europe, there are 2 that are currently producing. Actually, there's also in the Czech Republic, there is another reactor that started producing astatine. And in the UK, we've only just started producing. So we've had our first couple of batches of astatine-211 using the Birmingham MC40 cyclotron. And this is also part of an MRIP project that's we're basically looking at what we can do with what we already have in the UK. We don't have much radionuclide supply, but what can we do to improve it? So that's also hugely exciting. We've received a lot of help from the Law Cost Action, and this is a network for optimized astatine labeled radiopharmaceuticals, basically providing a network to support the production of astatine-211 and to run clinical trials in astatine-211 of astatine-211 compounds. So from the MRIP program, we also had funding to develop targeting, irradiating and processing in collaboration with the University of Birmingham, King's College London, Queen Mary University of London, which is my university, and the National Physical Laboratory as well. And so we've started doing our first processing of targets that have been irradiated at the University of Birmingham. They are transported down to London, and then we process the targets and we extract the astatine-211. The next step is to try and do chemistry with that, and we want to try with astatine the labeling of meta-iodo-benzylguanidine. Instead of iodo, it will be meta-astato-benzylguanidine. Now, the huge advantage of this, as you know, this is for treating children with neuroblastoma, and the doses that they get from the I-131 are enormous, something like 20 gigabecquerels, which completely wipes out their immune system. They have to be isolated away from their parents, very young children, whereas astatine, it has low energy X-rays and some alphas. So this would be a game changer for that group of patients if it was possible to use astatine instead of iodine. There may also be efficacy benefits, of course. So here we are collaborating also with the University of Copenhagen, Atlee Solutions, which has a rig, and also in vitro, now called Perspective. So you may think it's very difficult to do all the processing, but Atlee has developed a rig that is a GMP module that can process the target and also do the chemistry. So this has also been thought about. And if we have a look at the funding that has come out of the networks, the astatine networks, is this huge funded, European funded project, the ICI Accelerate EU. So if you're interested in looking at what's happening with astatine-211 and the clinical trials that they want to run, there's a FAP compound, there is a substance P compound. So this is really, there's a lot of momentum around astatine-211 at the moment. So if we have a look at, these hugely exciting radionuclides, as I said, actinium-225, we don't have a UK supply of it, and I have no doubt that we will not be manufacturing actinium-225 radiopharmaceuticals in the UK. I think that they will be sent from Europe, or they could even be sent from the US for clinical trials. And so us not having manufacturing of them will not prevent UK patients from being in actinium-225 trials. However, as not having manufacturing for lead-212 and astatine-211 radiopharmaceuticals will prevent our patients from being able to get these hugely exciting therapies. So what would our suggested UK model be for adoption of these radionuclides? Well, my suggested model, and some people who agree with me, I'm sure there are many who disagree, but we think that a centralized radiopharmacy with on-site production of lead-212 would be the most effective way. In fact, for both of these radionuclides, this one at the site of a new high-energy cyclotron facility. Of course, these are very expensive facilities, and we do have people looking at how this can be funded and how we could move forward with these plans in the UK. Failing that, our second option would be to have thorium-228 generators. Remember, I said that they are 1.9 years half-life in 2 or 3 hospital hubs producing and supplying radiopharmaceuticals. This, of course, has its own problems around REPIA limits on thorium-228, which we need to work with regulators on in order to move this option or this route forward. A similar kind of scenario could be seen for the astatine-211, where you would have production in 2 or 3. So you would send the irradiated targets from a high energy cyclotron, even if it's Birmingham, and then process it at 2 or 3 locations around the UK. And another option would be to have radium-224 generators, which, as I've said, they have a shorter half-life. So you may have heard of Radionuclides for Health UK, and this is an advocacy project that we have been running, Queen Mary, King's College London, and National Nuclear Laboratory, and you can have a look at it there. But these are things that we have been suggesting and advocating and kind of lobbying the government and anybody who will listen to say this is what we need in the UK. New nuclear infrastructure such as high energy cyclotrons, production of lead-212, research reactor. We need processing capabilities. We need the regulatory framework, on the REPIA side, but also MHRA. We need centralized radiopharmacy, and we need to address the skills gap that is involved in all of these activities. So when I say steps towards moving novel targeted alpha therapies into the clinic in the UK, this is further away than you might think. Except for those things that are happening and people are knocking on your door already, you can go ahead with that. I would say to embrace those types of opportunities, because it's an opportunity for your hospital to gain funding. It's an training for your staff in application of alpha therapies, for instance, actinium-225 alpha therapies, and they are hugely exciting therapies. So those are all real opportunities. If we want to open the country up for the next things that are coming down the line, then new infrastructure is needed. And we as a community need to advocate for this. So I would encourage you to mention this, wherever you can in your internal research meetings, at, whichever external meetings you go to, just to kind of keep the conversation going. We need, these are the things that we need: high energy cyclotron, centralized radiopharmacy, investment in lead-212 production from nuclear material, and a research reactor. So, if we keep this at the top of the agenda, then eventually it becomes accepted that these are the things that we need. It's not just pie in the sky. They are necessities, and we've got to see how can we do it. We need to resolve the regulatory barriers. For example, MHRA regulation, which, as Gilly said, there are people working on this within our community, which is hugely exciting. And also we need to work on other regulations, nuclear regulations, such as the REPIA for thorium-228, which has a very low limits, which is a barrier. So as individuals, and individual hospitals, we can plan to participate in clinical trials. As I said, this can bring funding to change your EA licenses, for instance, training for your staff, and we can promote molecular radiotherapy approaches locally and get, clinical oncologists that might not otherwise have been involved and interested in molecular radiotherapies. We can participate in UK initiatives, user groups, which Radionuclides for Health UK runs a few user groups to create critical mass, and have a whole country approach, to say, how can we matchmake our imaging on dosimetry capabilities with hospitals that may be more remote, who don't have good coverage? How can we increase our regional capability? So I just want to say thank you to the things that I've mentioned. Some of the projects that I've mentioned, the UK National Nuclear Laboratory, have been absolutely brilliant. Our lead-212 project we're doing with CycLife, MPL are always so supportive of everything that we do. And the University of Birmingham has been really great in supplying us with astatine-211 irradiated targets, etc. King's College is our collaborator in all of this, and in all of these projects, and are running some MRIT projects themselves as well. And the people in my lab who are involved in the preclinical side, especially I would say Max Palmer, Charlotte Rivers, and Jennifer Young, have been really involved in these initiatives to get new radionuclides going in the UK. Thanks very much, and I hope that my internet connection didn't drop out during that talk.
Thank you, Jane. So I thought that was absolutely fantastic, and you know, internet connection did keep going, so that's really wonderful. I feel like I want to do a round of applause at the end because it was so good. So we have a question, first question from Maggie Cooper in the Q&As tab. So Maggie's question is, how do we meet the challenges of producing iodinated radiopharmaceuticals to be theranostic pairs with astatine? So do you want to kick that off, Jane, and then, you know, see if anyone else on the panel has got anything to add?
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Maggie. You're asking a question that you're trying to solve. You might be the best person to answer this question. You know, theranostic pairs for astatine compounds, they are generally, I mean, we would hope that we could have some fluorinating compounds, which will be the most available kind of radionuclides and the easiest to produce and transport around the country for a astatine 211 radiopharmaceutical. If we need to do dosimetry, on the other hand, that's an interesting question, and then we really need I-124. For dosimetry, we do need new capability in the UK because we don't currently have any I-124 production. But as I know that KCL has an MRIT program on I-124 production. You know, this is something that we are looking at in the UK and are working towards. So yeah, there's two options really. You know, the fluorinating, like the MFBG, which is being used in the Netherlands, and then the other, if we want to do dosimetry, which is a hugely important aspect of any therapy, then we could use the I-124.
Thank you. Has anybody else got anything to add? No, I've got about 4 questions written down, so if no one else pipes up, I've got a few to plow on with. Some of them may be silly questions, but I'm going to go for it. So it was, you know, probably all know my background is in radiopharmacy. I'm not a clever physicist or a clinician, so forgive me for questions, it might be dumb. But the first, when I was looking at the different sort of emission profiles, and this is possibly a question for Ian and John, but you know, anyone who's got anything to say, looking at the emission profiles, obviously the actinium had the 4 alphas, but the certainly the lead with its beta emissions, I did wonder, what does that have an impact in terms of how we deliver the therapies, or what facilities we might need within our departments if that was to become something that was routinely used? So I suppose directing that at maybe Ian first, and then seeing if anyone else, if John's got any thoughts on it.
I mean, I think all the alphas, I think, have beta emissions somewhere down the chains. Yeah, I think so. In that sense, I don't think it's a major issue. I think it's something that's worth considering. You know, we think of alpha emitters and sort of talk about them as if that's all they are. But I think they're sort of, you know, maybe the crossfire effect isn't going to be the greatest contributor because, you know, the activities we're talking about are lower than we would normally use for beta emitters. So I don't think there'll be necessarily a big part of the therapeutic delivery, and probably not a big problem in that, in any sort of practical sense. Don't know what John thinks.
So, I mean, I think from a toxicity point of view, there may be implications, and I think Jane alluded to the issues with actinium and these lots of daughter alphas, and potentially sort of bouncing off the ligand and then getting to places that you don't want them really. And you know, I think some of the early clinical work has suggested quite a lot of hematological toxicity, for example, with actinium, that might be because stuff just gets a bit further beyond the tumor than you'd like. So I think thinking about those things is definitely important. It's early days, obviously, but that's one of the major attractors of the astatine, isn't it? That it is simple, just one alpha, and maybe that's safer. So I think we need to be investigating the range of these things, the range of different things, and comparing the relative toxicities.
Thank you. We have another question in the chat. I think I might direct this at you, Juliana, if that's okay, and then open it up to see if anyone else has got a comment. So this is from Umar Ali. How are the regulations holding clinical trials back?
So it's a really important point, and I think something we were hugely passionate about when we began MPIP, that we recognise that working with our regulators very closely and forming that community together and understanding what a radiopharmaceutical is and actually how we can work together, to fold through those barriers was something really important to us and in our program as we sort of developed the total body PET program. So we have now formed a trusted advisor group within the UK, and with that we've got a series of work packages ongoing and actions that we want to do to be able to make it much easier and to also understand what the process of what a radiopharmaceutical is, but also what does a radiopharmaceutical clinical trial look like, and how can we work to sort of knock down those barriers together as a community. So that's something that we were really keen to pursue, and something we were very keen to push forward into the new year as well.
Thank you, Juliana. Okay, I wondered if I could ask this, possibly direct this at you, John. Although you mentioned already it's early days for these products, and it certainly is, but where do you see them fitting in with therapies that, not just radionuclide therapies, but generally with therapies that are already available to patients?
So I think that's a really important question, Gilly, and yeah, so clearly we're seeing trials in all sorts of tumor types that haven't traditionally been treated with these sort of molecular radiotherapy type treatments. So it's a big part of my work, but I look after a niche group of cancers like thyroid cancer and neuroendocrine tumors where this is used. But we're seeing increasing expansion into prostate cancer, breast cancer, and there are in prostate cancer it's a crowded field. There are lots of other therapy options for those patients. So I think it's really critical that we do the trials to prove where these treatments best sit in terms of sequencing with other treatments or potentially combinations with other treatments. So there is early work looking, for example, at the combination of immunotherapy with molecular radiotherapy. Can the two work together to get even better outcomes? And I think I would say this because I'm a clinical oncologist, but I think I think engaging with the clinical oncology community is going to be really important, because we are in a way the gatekeepers of these patients. The patients with these other cancers sit under our care. We consider the range of treatments that are available, and I think it's really important that my colleagues are aware of the exciting potential of molecular radiotherapy as well as another modality that we can consider, and look at where our patients can best benefit from these things in their treatment pathways. So yeah, really good question, but I think challenging, and we need to engage, I think, a wider audience to make sure that it is considered.
Yes, I think identifying the stakeholders and engaging them, but also being clear, as we've talked about recently, being clear about what we're actually asking of them and what we're trying to achieve. So I think clarity is really important. Jane, you mentioned the radionuclides for health agenda, and many people will have seen the white paper that came out. Was it a couple of years ago now, I think? And part of that was obviously you mentioned the centralized radiopharmacy. I just wondered if you'd made any progress with that, or how when you've got something with a half-life of 7.2 hours, how that would work for your average patient in Aberdeen, for example.
Yes, well, if you think that, we send FGG around the country, it's got 110 minutes half-life. I think 7.2 hours is a really amenable half-life, for sending things around the country. So I'm not sure we would be limited by that, because you could just make more radioactivity, and so to send out to the most remote regions. And to me, NHS radiopharmacies do a fantastic job, and they are chronically understaffed and overworked, and to try and put the production of these therapy radionuclides into hospital radiopharmacies, you need to think about that very carefully, about which ones and how the funding would be worked out, because you need extra staff. It's a very expensive, and it needs to be a well-funded operation. So, to have a centralized radiopharmacy, that would take the burden off the local radio pharmacies. All they would need to do would be to receive, maybe do some QC or something like that. So and I think that would improve access immeasurably. If we had that type of facility within the UK, access to radiopharmaceuticals would be greatly improved for patients in the UK. Yeah, there was another aspect to your question. I can't remember what it was. I
think it was just it was about since the white paper. It was just a general question about the update on progress with there was a number of recommendations in the white paper. I just would be interested to see if how things are progressing.
So we've continued to advocate for things like I say, centralized radiopharmacy, and there has been some progress made. I don't know if Juliana can allude to any progress or encouraging news.
Absolutely. No, I can have a really good go. So I think as a capital and as MPIP, you're hugely passionate, obviously, that we need to and want to treat our patients. We've got wonderful clinical experts. So wherever we can facilitate, we can. So we've spent a number of years now trying to facilitate and develop the business case for a centralized radiopharmacy, recognizing that the investment for that is significant. So there has been a significant work in that. And I think it's been great to bring all of the regulators, the HSE, the EA, and MHRA all together to say that forming a consortium early it is the best way that we're going to make this a success as the UK. So it's been great to see everyone together really pushing towards actually how we're going to get that funding and where that funding pot comes through. But we are really excited in the coming days to be able to make an announcement in some sort of interim excitement towards that, and actually how the UK can move forward into developing that longer term plan. So yeah, we will look forward to sharing that with you all. So please do keep an eye out for the news.
Thank you. Well, we have no other questions in the chat. I'm just looking I think I've asked all my little list myself.
May I come in on that, Julie? Just so, Joan, I'm a huge fan, as you know, of the idea of the centralized radiopharmacy, but as you've alluded to, and Juliana, it's massively expensive. And the problem we frequently run up to in this area is the health service are really not interested or in a position to invest in stuff until it's very clear that it's going to come into routine clinical practice. But as you said, we need access to this stuff now so that we can be taking part in the trials to build up the expertise. So, do you think are there other models, other places we can look? Our industry interested in working with us on this to co-fund? Other opportunities in academia? You can just speculate whether there are other places that we can look to try and support this development.
I mean, so for a centralized radiopharmacy, obviously you need to build this as well. So, we are also looking at other routes to the clinic, with these radionuclides, to just start doing the work, even if it's not, the whole country can be involved, but a kind of interim type of plan. How can we demonstrate the pathway? Because I think that's really important. It's not, especially for, getting investment, as Juliana mentioned, it's, we need to show the appetite, for participation from, the NHS, but also the will of, commercial companies to do clinical trials in the UK and not just do them other places in the world. And, so we're really trying to work towards finding that route into the clinic, be it with whoever will work with us, basically. And, you know, I mentioned that there are barriers to this. You know, there can be regulatory barriers. You know, one of the regulations that is taxing us at the moment is the fact that the REPIA regulation says that we're only allowed to have 700 megabecquerels of thorium-228 on site, which makes it difficult to use generators that are big enough. But you know, we're trying to look at ways in which we can circumvent this regulation and work with, you know, HSA in order to, you know, kind of get around this. So, you know, we're looking at, you know, just it's starting in one hospital or two hospitals, you know, that type of thing, just to make a route to the clinic for, you know, these hugely exciting new and novel radionuclides.
Thank you, Jane. I've just noticed there is another question sort of following on from the one I put to John earlier about where these treatments might sit, from Arash Latifultajar. Thank you, Arash, for your question. It said, thank you so much for a great talk. So thank you for the thanks. Can I ask, where do you see the new therapies sitting in future when it comes to clinical trials and patient management? Currently, for instance, most lutetium PSMA for prostate cancer are normally used as last line of therapies, and there are growing suggestions that using radionuclide therapies at earlier stage of castrate-resistant prostate cancer might be more beneficial. As Prof Wadsley indicated, in a crowded market, in your opinion, how can these trials be implemented to find the sweet spot for treating patients?
Do you want me to take that?
Well, I don't know. That's the end of the question. I don't know what to say, but I'm opening up to you guys.
So I mean, a really good question. But I mean, there are a raft of trials, as I'm sure Arash knows, in prostate cancer with lutetium PSMA being brought further and further forward, and even almost as a sort of adjuvant treatment. So I think that data will emerge. I think there is a strong feeling that the benefits may be greater in early stage disease than we're seeing, as you say, the patients where these things always start at the very end stage, where patients are less well. So yeah, I think we really do need in the UK to be taking part in those trials. So we're generating the data to justify the use of these treatments, and as well as the clinical efficacy. I think it's really important when we're doing those studies that we look at cost effectiveness as well, and looking at optimizing the use of these treatments, and things like doing the dosimetry to make sure that every patient who gets the treatment gets as much benefit as possible out of the treatment. And frankly, some of the schedules that we use at the moment, they're very one size fits all, probably don't get all of our patients the best benefit that they can out of the treatment. So lots and lots of work to be done on that to see how we get the best outcomes for our patients from these exciting treatments.
Right, well, thank you, John. I think we're just about out of time, in fact, perfectly timed. So I'd like to finish by thanking our speaker, Jane, and all you panel members for providing with us an informative and interesting hour to warm up our chilly January Tuesday evening. So everyone, our next webinar will take place on the 11th of February, and that one is entitled NIHR Funding for Clinical Trials and Studies in MRT, and will be delivered by Dr. Ian Newington. So registration for this, again, is via the BNMS website. So finally, I think I only have one thing left to do, and that's to thank you all for joining us. I'm off to have my tea and watch the Liverpool match. So I shall see you next time.